Hello, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews brought to you by the Sci-Fi-Christian.com. As always, I am Ben DeBono, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Richard Matheson's novel, The Incredible Shrinking Man. I have had this one on my Kindle for 2-3 months. I bought it in one of the Kindle sales that they have every now and then. It was like their deal of the day or whatever. So I picked it up a while back. And because I like Richard Matheson, read a lot of his stuff. But in light of the recent tragic news of his passing, I figured, this is a good time to give it a shot. Give Richard Matheson his first appearance here on the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews. And we'll see how it is. Going into it, maybe that's the best place to start, is what were my expectations before I tell you actually what I thought of this, and if it lives up to some of the great Richard Matheson novels. Obviously, I Am Legend probably is most famous. Going into it, I was optimistic, but maybe a little apprehensive would be the best way to describe it. Like I said, I've been a big Richard Matheson fan. I Am Legend, Hell House, What Dreams May Come, tons of his short stories. I've by no means read all of them, but a handful. Duel, his great novella, short story. So I've been a big Richard Matheson fan of a lot of his stuff, but then on the other hand, there have been other things I've read by him. Stir of Echoes I didn't care for that much. 7 Steps to Midnight, which was kind of his mystery novel, I remember not liking at all when I read that. So it was one of those things where, even though I think Richard Matheson is obviously a great writer, he's also one of those writers who has written so much that there's plenty out there that isn't great. And kind of, like Stephen King might be today, where Stephen King has written some amazing books, but I mean, the guy publishes like 1 to 2 a year, so there's bound to be plenty of garbage in there as well. So going into a Richard Matheson novel, I never quite know what to expect. Add to that, the title is kind of cheesy, which, maybe that's shallowness on my part to read a title and let that kind of lower my expectations for the book, but shallow or not, there you have it. So the title's fairly cheesy, The Incredible Shrinking Man. I understand it's published in a different era, so I give it a pass for that. Whatever. So I honestly went in neither expecting this to be an amazing book or expecting it to be a terrible book. It could have gone either way. Thankfully, it went in the way of being a pretty fantastic read. This book really surprised me with its depth. Maybe surprised is the wrong word, just because Richard Matheson certainly is capable of this, but I was relieved to see that this wasn't just going to be a gimmick novel where obviously you have a guy who's shrinking, in this case our main character Scott, who's shrinking a total of 1/7 of an inch a day, so 1 inch a week. And in a novel like this, okay, obviously for sci-fi fantasy fans like I am, you enjoy the gimmick to a point. The gimmick certainly doesn't stop you from picking up the book the way it might some other people who aren't fans of the genre. Maybe it even draws you into the book because for those of us who are fans, we like the gimmick at least on one level. But the thing that I've come to dread is novels where the gimmick is all there is. Where the writer is so excited about his idea that, we're gonna have a shrinking man, and what's gonna happen to him, and what's it like to be small, and all this stuff. And so the gimmick becomes the whole novel, and that's the fear with something like this. But Richard Matheson, I would argue, rightly understands that the gimmick on its own is the least interesting thing about his book. The gimmick is there to add flavor, it's there to add kind of that sci-fi twist to put in the genre, but ultimately the gimmick is only as strong as it is used to talk about whatever themes and ideas the writer wants to explore, and to explore the characters in the book and all that. And Matheson uses this gimmick of a shrinking man to do that brilliantly. This is a book that is about hopelessness and powerlessness. As you know, the book kind of starts when Scott is like an inch tall or something like that, but there's frequent flashbacks so that we see his progress. And Matheson just does a brilliant job of drawing you into the rage that he feels. Why is this happening? And there's no answer to that. I mean, we do kind of get an explanation, as it were, which is one of the weaker parts of the book. But metaphysically, at least philosophically, there's no reason for this. It just is happening to him. It's not punishment for sin. It's not cosmic justice. It's not, anything like that. It just is. And he's powerless to it. And so his life is slipping away from him. His wife slips away from him. His daughter slips away from him. His job slips away from him. Everything is just being taken from him, and he's completely powerless to stop that throughout the course of the novel. And the way Matheson draws you into the psychology of that, into that feeling of powerlessness, is just incredibly well done. Honestly, this book reminded me a lot of I Am Legend, with that similar theme, that the world is falling apart around you and you are helpless to stop it. Maybe the inverse of I Am Legend, because the world's actually fine in this case. It's simply that Scott himself is falling apart. And so from his perspective, the world is falling apart. But unlike in I Am Legend, where we're really going into this kind of apocalypse type setting, none of that's taking place. In fact, some of the hopelessness and rage that Scott feels throughout the plot is driven by the fact that everybody else just goes on with their lives. Everybody else is just living their normal day-to-day existence, and at best he's a spectacle for them as his story gets out into the media and everything like that. So really an inverse of I Am Legend, and it's really, really well done. Like I said, the psychology of it, the philosophy of it, there's a whole existential theme in here of what do our lives actually mean, and the best way for fiction to get at ideas like that is to kind of take those ideas and push them to their extreme. So for this guy, who is basically on death row, where, okay, I'm shrinking 1/7 of an inch a day, it's not hard to pull out the calculator and figure out when I get down to 0. So what does his existence mean? What's the purpose of survival throughout all of these scenes that take place in the present in the book, where he's an inch or less, and he's trying to survive in a world that's now extremely hostile in the cellar of his house. But now, there's spiders and all this stuff. And so this whole world that he's inhabited has become very, very hostile to him. And so what's the purpose of survival for someone like that? Those are the questions that Matheson chooses to ask in this novel. And by asking them in an extreme setting like that, novelists force us to ask them about ourselves, and that's the genius of a book like this. So if you listen to the podcast, the Sci-Fi Christian podcast, I'm always the one who's talking about, okay, enough with your CGI action scenes, enough with fight scenes, all this. Let's get to the depth. I want to hear about themes. I want to hear about ideas when I read a story or watch a movie or whatever. And this novel is a perfect example of that. Okay. So in terms of criticisms, really the only criticism I would have of this novel is that it shouldn't have been a novel. It would have been better if it had been a novella more along the length of I Am Legend. Reading it on the Kindle, I'm not quite sure where they stack up and how they compare exactly in terms of length, but I'd be shocked if I Am Legend wasn't substantially shorter. And it seemed like this isn't a long novel, don't get me wrong. It's not like this is a 1,000-page tome. It's probably 200-300 pages if you're reading it in paperback or whatever. But it needed to be shorter. It was stretched out a bit too far, and that made it drag in a few places. Not in a way that loses you or whatever, but in a way where some of the philosophical elements that are the highlight of the novel then get lost in scenes of Scott running around his basement trying to avoid this spider. And those go on for a bit too long. So that's really my only critique of the novel. Beyond that, it's brilliant. The title's cheesy, but don't let that stop you. If you can accept the gimmick, which if you're a sci-fi fan like me, that's what we do, is we accept outlandish gimmicks, that this is what's happening in the story, and it doesn't matter that it would never happen in real life, that a guy would start shrinking like this. We just accept that. So if you can accept that, which you should be able to if you're a fan of the genre, then you're going to love this book. It's a classic. It deserves the type of recognition that so many works of Matheson's career have had. So do yourself a favor, read it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. Loved it. Wish it was just a little bit shorter, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a great, great read, and I highly recommend it. So 4.5 stars for The Incredible Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson. Well, that's all for now. I'm Ben DiBono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews. Goodbye.